Jetaun Legg. Welcome to our special this evening on media violence and how it affects our society.
And I'm Charles Alexis, and today we're going to be discussing how the media may play a part in breaking down the moral fibers of our society.
This evening we have a very distinguished guest panel. We have Tony Violante, who is a columnist with the Buffalo newspaper. We have City Court Judge Russel, and we have Cal Pendelton, who is an entertainment reporter and a teacher in media persuasion at the University of Buffalo. Tony, we'd like to start with you. How much of an effect does rap music have on the violence we hear about on our nightly news?
It's hard to put a specific amount. I mean, it's hard to say this murder was caused by rap, if indeed any murder could be blamed to an art form. But I think what rap does is set a standard, and it's a terrible standard in many ways, by promoting a promiscuous, vulgar, violent, anti-female lifestyle. Again, I don't want to blame the art form itself, because I think rap music is wonderful, and if you've heard groups like Diggable Planets or Arrested Development, or many of the other young bands that are articulating a social message, rap indeed can be a powerful tool of social influence. But gangster rap, as it's so called, which features gang banging, murder, demeaning women, violence, and I think sets a standard in the community that becomes an unofficial endorsement of this lifestyle. And it seems to be particularly hurtful in the African American community, because indeed, rap is an African American art form. It began on the streets of the inner city. And if these rappers, I'm specifically talking about gangster rappers, if they become the role models for children to look up to, and children want to carry guns, and children want to join gangs, and children want to kill other children, as is sadly happening on the streets of our city. I just saw some statistics that the homicide rate for juveniles has gone up over 100%, I think, in the last decade. I think this can contribute, and being a newspaper reporter, I exist by the First Amendment of the Constitution, which guarantees freedom of speech. I would never want rap music censored. But I think the real crux of the issue is rappers have to show some responsibility to their own community, to their own people. And what I find particularly interesting is that the backlash against rap is coming out of the black community now. It's not the white kids in the suburbs who are wearing hip-hop outfits and talking dirty. It's indeed the parents, the clergy, the people in the inner city who are suffering the most from this and are demanding that rappers assume some responsibility for the music and the way it affects the community.
And Tony, would you say that a lot of these so-called gangster rap artists are actually bringing back the old damaging stereotypes of black people?
I feel that way, Charles. I feel that in past years, racism is always prevalent in American society. And in past years, you had racist stereotypes created by white people, dating back really to the minstrel shows, maybe, where white artists would put blackface on. And it's a terrible legacy. And it took years and years to get rid of programs like Amos and Andy, which was a famous radio program, and then a television program which portrayed African Americans as unintelligent human beings, and people laughed at that image. But those images were created by white people. This new image of the gangster, of the gang member, of the young African American person who walks the streets and lives for violence and lives to demean women, that's coming out of the black community, the black gangster rappers. And that's what I find so sad, because I'm a person who grew up with music in the 60s and 70s. Marvin Gaye is one of my idols. I think he's one of the great musicians of all time. So I'll never forget the Beatles, people asking John Lennon who his idols were, that he would say people like Marvin Gaye and Smokey Robinson and artists like that. And even today we see great performers like Whitney Houston and I mentioned Arrested Development. I think there's this great heritage in the black community of music. When you look at rock and roll and pop music in America, it's derived mostly from black music. Certainly people like Elvis Presley took that and made it their own music in some ways, but it all begins with the black music in the church, in the gospel choirs, in the cotton fields, and the days of old. To see what the gangster rappers are doing to the heritage of a black musical art form, to me is sad. I don't want to condemn them. Again, as a censorship issue, I don't want to say they don't have the right to make this music, but I wish they would show more responsibility.
So, and I guess in essence, to summarize what you're saying, is that they are self-perpetuating those negative stereotypes, and I guess to some extent fulfilling the prophecy that was originally created by those
racist white people. Yeah, exactly. And that's what's so sad about it. Although, on the other side of the coin, they would argue, well, we're bringing money into the black community. We're giving young black artists a chance to make millions and millions of dollars. And I think when rap really took hold a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when it exploded, I think it was a vibrant music form that really helped bring back to life a lot of popular music, which had gotten pretty dull. This always seems to happen every 10 years. When rock and roll started, it started out of R&B. When in the late 70s, when all you heard were groups like Styx and other kind of elevator music, I might call it, or classic rock. Michael Jackson came along with Thriller, and again, kind of pushed popular music up a step. And I think rap did that in the late 1980s. But now, 2 years later, rap is very mainstream. This is an argument I always make, and not everybody agrees with me. That people like Dr. Dre and Ice-T and Snoop Doggy Dogg, they sell millions of records. Fresh Prince has his own TV show. Again, if you go in the suburbs, you see white kids dressing like inner city kids, like rappers. I mean, that's part of the. I mean, it's very mainstream, very commercialized. You see commercials on TV selling cars and deodorant using rap songs or Coca-Cola.
Even the Flintstones too.
Yeah, Flintstones. So rap has become very mainstream. And it's a multi-million-dollar industry, and I just think, despite all the money it's bringing in, despite the opportunities it's given young black artists, they absolutely must show more responsibility, because the fact is, out on the street, kids are dying, families are being broken up, and if this music plays any role, even if it's a minor role, I think they have a responsibility to their own people, to their own community, to change that.
Judge Russel, you get to see the perpetrators of crime on a daily basis. How much of a role do you feel the media plays on what you see in the courtroom every day?
With regards to that question, I think, as Tony had mentioned, it's a question, the question that you asked as far as what impact media may have with regards to the conduct of others is a question that will be debated for some time. And sometimes it's better left to the experts, the psychologists, the psychiatrists, to indicate what that influence or that impact may be. However, certain things are evidenced by mere dress. As Tony had mentioned, that in a certain stereotype, in a certain style, by the clothing, by the wear, they emulate what they have seen on television. Mm-hmm. When you have the various artists, not only artists in the music industry, but also athletes who are artists in their own right, whatever their gift might be, and they're selling particular wares. And then I might have a numerous amount of individuals who appear in court who emulate what we all may see or hear. It does have an effect. It does have an impact. To what degree? To what degree that what they see or what they hear may in turn cause them to act a certain way is always subject to debate. However, I would indicate that recently, or not long ago, the American Psychological Association, in their report, indicated that before a young person completes grammar school, they would have witnessed over 100,000 acts of violence on television and 8,000 murders. The Surgeon General has, in the Surgeon General report, has indicated that, yes, in fact, what is observed media violence is significant and attributable to violence amongst our young people. Attorney General Janet Reno also indicated that youth violence is one of our greatest threats and cause and health concerns here in our nation. Does media impact? I would say it does. To what extent? I don't have an answer for that.
Thank you. Cal, as an expert in the media and a teacher, how do you feel about what's being said so far about the media's impact on our society?
Well, I agree wholeheartedly with both Tony and Judge Russell. I think that when you look at what's going on today in our society, when you look at the inner city violence, when you look at, as Tony said also, the degradation of women, this has an impact it has an impact from the media. So when kids in particular, well, actually it's our whole society that's really kind of searching for answers. Now, when you don't have these answers, the media plays the role in giving those answers to people. And this just kind of goes double for kids. You know, when you look at these kids, as Judge Russell said, in the courtrooms, imitating the basketball players with the clothing, that's just one example of how influential the media is on their minds. And a good example was 22 years ago when something that Judge Russell and I could probably remember when the movie Superfly came out. You know, you had a lot of kids imitating that. You know, it's not something that is used in a positive way. And I would say that where the black exploitation period started was during that time, where you had all of these people who were producing films about black people that really didn't correlate with the entire community. You know, they didn't show people a teacher like myself or a judge like as Judge Russell. They just showed one sector of that community. So that's where the initial damage started. Now, what's happening today is, as Tony said, the gangster rappers are just picking up from there, and they're just, you know, kind of keeping the ball rolling. And it's a very sad thing, you know.
If I may add something, Cal, I don't think this problem can be confined to gangster rappers, and I know that's not what you were saying in the movies. But why does a Steven Seagal movie become #1 at the box office, or Arnold Schwarzenegger? I know many rappers will tell me, well, when Schwarzenegger kills 20 cops in Terminator, that, you know, people love that. It's good entertainment. You take your family to see it. But if Ice-T makes a song called Cop Killer, then all of a sudden everybody's really upset. They're arguing that it's just artistic expression. But I think both are wrong. I don't think because one's wrong, that makes the other right or gives Ice-T an excuse. And I guess it's a problem, as you said, Cal, that goes to society. Why do we as people want to go to a movie and watch blood and gore and see people being shot? I think when this becomes real, that's when it changes. It's easy to look on the screen and see Schwarzenegger kill somebody, but if you've ever been to a crime scene, and I know as a reporter before I covered music, I mean, it's devastating to see one person shot dead on the street and you see real blood. It's very devastating. Maybe that's the problem, is that this violence is so stylized and glamorized, it loses its reality.
Well, if I could add also, Tony and Cal, part of the concerns and the question is that if we see so much violence, whether it's through visually or through the music, it begins to desensitize us. And I believe the various experts in that area, like I said, once again, the psychologists, the psychiatrists, they talk about someone becoming desensitized. Therefore, if I'm desensitized to observing, witnessing, seeing a violent act, then it doesn't become easier for me to act out in the same or similar manner, because I am no longer horrified by that conduct. I am no longer over enraged because I see this blood, this gore, because I see a gunshot wound. I've been conditioned. I've watched it. I've seen it. And you know, after watching it for such a long time, it's not that horrible.
That's right. Exactly.
Psychologically, that's how it can affect or impact. And I believe that in turn, it becomes easier for people to engage in that kind of, due to having become desensitized.
Yeah, exactly. And just to kind of pick up where Judge Russell left off, that it's really conditioning. It's a matter of conditioning. If you condition long enough to something, you know, it has to be repetitive. It becomes a very normal thing. So if you're seeing violence every day, and you know it's you know, on TV, you go to the movies, it's there. Although I will say, as a martial artist myself, the Steven Seagal movies are not as glorifying as Schwarzenegger, right? There's philosophy behind that. It's the reluctant type of hero, which gets into another end of the martial arts, which I won't go into, but just to kind of defend him a little bit. But with the other conditioning part, psychologists have proven that 88% of our behavior comes from the subconscious mind, and that's exactly where the media goes to. It skips right past the conscious mind and hits you in the subconscious mind, which is what causes a lot of the behavior that we see.
I have a question. I know you're a judge, not a psychologist or psychiatrist, but I guess to some extent media might be considered as, to some extent, creating sociopathic behavior. If I understand the correct term of sociopath as opposed to a psychopath. But as far as being desensitized, emotionally numb, I think that would be consistent with sociopathic behavior. that it desensitizes people and it makes them less reactive to something that's violent. I'm trying to use that term, sociopath.
Is it okay?
Please, sir.
No, here's an interesting point about it. I think along with what, maybe kind of related to what you're saying, Charles, is that Axl Rose, lead singer for Guns N' Roses, he wears a shirt with Charles Manson's picture. And Guns N' Roses just did an album, and they did a song by Charles Manson. And they were saying that, well, they thought Charles Manson was cool. You know, they were not around in the 60s. And for those who don't know Charles Manson, he led a gang of people that committed mass murders, I think killed 7 or 8 people. One of the persons who was killed was Sharon Tate, who was 8 months pregnant and brutally stabbed in this murder. And I don't know what it was, Judge. I don't know if it was ignorance or what, but I guess there is an attraction to the outlaw, that Manson becomes a cult hero. And I was watching, I think it was 2020 or some show this week, and they interviewed Jeffrey Dahmer, who they killed dozens of young children and committed cannibalism and every other atrocity you can think of. And again, he has become a public figure in the media and almost, again, a personality, I guess you would call it. It seems that if you're a mass murderer today, you become like a rock star or an actor. I mean, you could hit the talk show circuit. Rock stars will wear your picture. And again, I think it's this warped values in society.
Exactly. And I'm glad, Tony, when you talk about values, because that's essentially the bottom line, where we're going, where we're here. And that is the issue of morality. And is there a responsibility? The next question, is there a responsibility for an artist, for media, or for any other person to portray, to offer certain moral or moralistic values? Or can you merely just reap the benefit and the financial reward and not care about the moral value? What impact does it have and effect on the health, safety, and welfare of others?
To make a point, is when I've asked this to rappers, and they will invariably say, they'll say, my job is not to give your children or values. They'll say, that's the mother and the father's job. That my job is to make records. I'm not responsible for your children's values. How would you answer that if a rapper told you that?
Well, if a rapper first told me that, that is the major question. The major question is there some responsibility for another person's conduct? In our laws, we do have laws set up regarding certain conduct and for a person to conduct themselves in certain ways. If it affects the safety, health, or welfare, then that conduct is regulated. And I'm not reaching the point of saying that media or music should be regulated. However, for certain other conduct, that conduct is regulated if it's going to affect my safety.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater.
Exactly. Now, also, I think in that regard, the rappers, whether they're rappers, whether they're pop artists, whether they're heavy metal, any form, or even with regards to the media, they have to start addressing it themselves. If they believe that it is having an impact to the extent where it is affecting the safety and health and welfare of the public, then they're going to have to address it. And one last point, and I was thinking because when you were talking about the conduct and the media may have, recently there was some young person who allegedly performed the act of arson, burned down the structure, and part of the rationale given was after watching Beavis and Butthead, and it was stating that fire was cool. He then acted out what he believed to be a cool act. That did, in fact, have a devastating effect.
I guess that's the real challenge in a democracy, isn't it, Judge? That if you have freedom, how do you combine freedom and responsibility? Because the government, the law, really can't encroach personal expression. So how do you? It's really an individual responsibility.
I think it goes back to the companies then, but the companies are just out for money.
Absolutely.
But I think they should try to make sure these artists are responsible enough to not put out anything, knowing the power and the impact they have on the youth. I think that maybe if that were to come into play, then it would start to make a difference. But the movie industry is just as bad. They don't care about anything. And as they said, it's not the only color in Hollywood that matters is green. So I think that alone sums up the studio executives and the record company executives' mentality towards this. They really don't care as long as it makes money.
One of the ironies of the Axl Rose situation is that the president, David Geffen, who's the president of Geffen Records, who Axl Rose's label, was a good friend of someone murdered by Charles Manson, and the record company issued an apology for the putting a song on the Guns N' Roses album, which Manson made. I was supposed to get over $200,000 in royalties, but later they made a deal where he wouldn't get the royalties. So it's strange.
Okay. Well, when we come back, we'll discuss the impact that sexually explicit programming has on our society. Welcome back. I'm Jetaun Legg, along with Charles Alexis, and this evening we're discussing how the media affects our society.
In our first segment, we talked about violence in our society. Now in our second segment, we're going to discuss sexuality in the media. And my first question is going to be addressed to Tony. And Tony, do you feel as though it's the sole responsibility of various artists, whether they be rap artists or musical entertainers in general, to be responsible for the so-called demeaning of women in music videos and also their actual music?
Boy, that's a difficult question in our democracy to assign responsibility to artists. But I think from an individual standpoint, the law can't do it, the government can't do it. They have to assume some responsibility. I mean, you hear the off-color language enough, and when does a woman become a hoe? If you keep hearing the word hoe in rap songs, and when you talk to male rappers, they'll say, well, that's a term, it's not necessarily a demeaning term. That they, when they use the term hoe, that they can use that as just a name for a woman. And they'll say some women are hoes. But apparently there's good hoes and bad hoes. But I've talked to women, and they'll say, I'm not a hoe, I'm a female, I'm a woman. At what point does that label become what a woman is? And that's the problem, because there's so much abuse of women in our society in terms of wife abuse, abuse of young women, rape, sexual harassment. When you put terms like hoe to describe other human beings, I think it's asking for trouble. And again, Charles, I wish I could wave a magic wand and say, okay, all you rappers, you're going to call these people women human beings, but it's not going to work. I mean, they use that, and they're the only ones that can change it. I think when women rise up and can come out against this, maybe it'll change. Maybe when society becomes offended as a whole. Yeah,
actually, as far as
it matters to her own, certainly.
As far as music videos are concerned, no one. As far as the music videos are concerned, no one is actually, forcing these women to be scantily dressed, scantily clad, and to, dance around half naked, and they're doing that on their own free will. There's no one standing with a gun or forcing them to. And so when they say that it's a rap artist's responsibility, shouldn't those women have some sort of a mind of their own?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I assume they know they're being exploited. I mean,
if you see a Luke video and someone's half naked, half dressed, and they're standing there, it's like, well, then you are a hoe and you are a bitch. I mean, why did you get on in the first place? No one put a gun to your head, and for the most part, I'm sure half these women aren't even getting paid.
No, it's true, and this has been going on.
They're exploiting themselves.
Right. I mean, you could make this argument 30 years ago with Playboy magazine. Why did women pose naked in a magazine? I think money is the root of all this. That it's, if you're a young aspiring actress and the only role you can get is to be in a 2 Live Crew video, well, I think it's a bad career move myself. But if that's your only gig, maybe you have to do it. But again, is that a woman's choice or is that an exploitation?
Well, getting back to the...
If that's the role society puts women in, that they want women to dance naked and to act out as hoes and bitches, then maybe the trouble is not with women, but in society for putting those roles on them.
Well, those women aren't really being forced to act like that. And for the most part, I was involved in a music video last summer, and there are women that were scantily clad, and we didn't pay them anything. If you want to come up there and show off your body and whatever the case may be, you're doing it out of your own so-called mind, all right? Those Luke videos, those women are not getting paid that much money, if any money at all. They're doing it because they think they're cute, just like they go down to these clubs I won't mention the club that's on Main Street across from some dubious radio station, and they have these wild days during the week, middle day of the week, and these women get up there and they shake what their mama gave them and all this stuff, and that offers some sort of financial remuneration. But there are cases when you go just up and down the street during a Juneteenth festival or whatever the case may be, and these women are wearing these revealing clothes and outfits. Nobody's forcing them to do that, and they want to get these videos.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with, again, the media. Thin is in. Mm-hmm. The more you show, the better you are, the better you look, the more skin, the tighter the clothing. And I think that has a lot to do with it. That's all we see on television. And I think a lot of the young girls especially feel that
Some
they
aren't all
have
that
to
young.
meet up
Some
to
aren't
that.
all that young.
No, a lot of them aren't, but I think, again, when the media shows you that the less clothing you wear, the thinner you are, the tighter your clothing is, the better you are portrayed. I mean, that's a lot
I
of
was
these
going to
girls
say,
are following.
one of the best videos I've seen is Queen Latifah's song Unity.
Yes.
And she says, I'm not your bitch. I'm not your hoe. And I think she's making a point that you can't call me this.
And that's what a lot of women need to do. They
But that's
need
hard to do.
They need to grow a brain, is that what you're saying, and grow their own decision
They need to
or
think for
something?
themselves and stop listening to the media and stop listening to thin is in, less is best. They need to
Set your
stop
own
listening
definition.
to that and say, this is who I am, whether you like it or not. I can be just as beautiful, fully dressed as I can half dressed.
That then brings me to what's a concern of mine. And that is, even if you say as adults, it cannot be mandated that you take a certain responsibility on yourself to act in a moral or moralistic way. What happens when your conduct affects young people who do not, or is not of that age, to have formed that ability to make certain decisions, make certain choices, or haven't reached that point to distinguish the difference between right and wrong? And the media, whether in whatever form it may take, they observe and see these images. Does responsibility, or is there a need for responsibility with regards to young people who have not formed, reached that age to distinguish between right and wrong?
And for example, you and I were both in the modeling industry. It's, everything is there's a set agenda as far as what they want from women and from men. Generally, for women, it's something, as you said,
Less is best.
Less is best. So it's really a matter of, as you said, the woman or women in society trying to set their own standards. You don't need to allow Madison Avenue, because that's who does all of this, sets all the standards, to define who you are. You should define who you are yourself, just as any other type of group that has been demeaned in the media. So
Exactly.
Less is best. I guess that can be applied to brains. Less brains is better. So that's
Charles, what would you say to an 8-year-old? Let's say her mother's working, her father, single parent family. She's home watching MTV or something. Let's say Yo MTV Raps comes on and there's a video, a Two Live Crew. I don't know if they would show a Two Live Crew video on MTV, but and showing a woman dancing like this, and this 8-year-old girl is there watching it. Do you think she's able to make the moral distinctions that this is wrong?
No, and I think that's a parent's responsibility. First of all, that scenario applied to me, and me and my wife were out working, and my child was at home. First of all, I would not have him watching MTV in the first place. I would have some sort of block or lock on a television set. And secondly, I certainly can't prevent them from seeing, these images, because it's very pervasive and very omnipresent in society. So what I have to do is I would have to sit down and talk to them one-on-one, like a parent would, and say, well, this is television, this is entertainment. These are adults, behaving and dressing in this particular manner, and at your young, tender age, that's not suitable, suitable behavior. And I would sit down and I would just simply explain to them what they've seen on television and what they see in society. I mean, that would be my job as a parent.
Well, I have a question. Does some things occur where it moves beyond the realm of just a parental responsibility? In other words, if something is so pervasive that even if a parent attempts to instruct their young person, their child, to work with their child, but if it's so pervasive that it still can have a detrimental effect or impact, then is there a need for society to then take a greater role rather than just leave it in the hands of the parent?
Well, Judge Russell, I'm going to direct this next question to you since we went into parenting. Being a father, how do you feel about the explicit ways that sex is portrayed? How do you handle it with your own children?
Well, with my own children, of course, as indicated, you work with your children, you're trying to instruct them, answer. But in addition to my own household, what concerns me is not only my household, but other households. If it's in fact corroborated as reported that parents now are less likely to be at home because of the changing of society and the responsibilities of society. If they're away from home 50, 60, 80 hours out of the week, if a lot of the parents are not home when their children arrive home from school, because many parents, we have to face it, there's not a lot of household where the wife may remain home and be a homemaker. A good portion of our household now are two-family household or a single-family household where the person is working. That means that person is away from home. If that child comes home from school, that child is going to do what? It is highly likely the child will turn on the television. You're not there to monitor that. Fine, you come home and you can engage in instruction, but there's still images that's going to be observed and that's going to be seen.
Jetaun, I did an interview with some people at MTV once, and I asked them who their audience is, and they said that they want the 18, I think it was 18 to 28-year-old, or 18 to 35. And yet, as Judge Russell said, when kids get home and they put on MTV, they could be 8, 9, 7 years old. And I mean, every kid in America, I think, knows Beavis and Butthead.
Yes.
It's a cartoon show. That's what really struck me as being dangerous.
Okay, Cal, you're an expert on this particular segment here. What do you think about being portrayed in movies, music, and television, the whole thing? What do you think?
Well, I think that, you mean sex? Well, overall, I think that it's really starting to be less censored. If you notice some of the programs on TV, like such as NYPD Blue, I believe it's, they show full nudity, and that's something that just as early as 3 to 5 years ago, you didn't actually see. So you have to wonder what are they going to be doing in 5 more years from now. So it has a enormous effect.
There once was a time when they didn't show two people kiss on television.
Exactly.
Right? And now it's moved up, like you said, to full nudity. Right. There's a certain amount of swearing they do allow on regular television.
It's interesting, Jetaun, how violence is so much more acceptable than sex. There was a big controversy just a few weeks ago when Roseanne on her show, she kissed another woman.
Yes.
And that was like, the end of the world. And yet every night on TV you could see violence, death after death, shootout after shootout. So there does seem to be a double standard to sex and violence. In this society, violence seems much more acceptable, where sex in many ways seems to have a lot more taboo.
Okay, I want to ask a general question. Either of you can jump in and answer it as you like. Is it safe to say that the media is responsible for the way that women are disrespected? So we touched on this earlier, but do any of you actually think that is the media's fault?
I don't know if I would totally blame the media, but certainly the media reinforces the stereotype, particularly in a society where men seem to have the key positions of power in most of the communications industry. That women are exploited, I think, in many ways in the way they're portrayed in commercials. And you watch a football game and you'll see beer commercials with women almost as ornaments. It's these guys hanging out in the bar drinking beer. It's strange, and it hasn't changed. You would think within the changes in society in the last 15 to 20 years with the growth of the women's movement that it would change. But unfortunately, that persists, I think, I would say.
I would just add, and in agreement with Tony, I believe media is a reinforcement or a stimulating vehicle for certain perception, but all things cannot be blamed on the media.
Exactly.
It's the responsibility of society. Society, those that are citizens, need to take an active role. If it's something that is truly offensive, it needs to be curbed. That message needs to be brought to those who put out that media. We're either not going to buy your product, we're not going to watch your particular station, we're not going to watch your program and support your program, and eventually that program is no longer going to be on the air.
So if the parents, if the teachers, if the community, if the churches, if they all did their part,
so forth,
the media probably wouldn't stand out strong.
Exactly. In fact, we did a program on that about a year ago. Judge Russel and I did. It's an active effort. It takes an active effort on everybody's part, the community, the media, and one thing that we haven't mentioned tonight, the home, the family. I think that unfortunately in our culture, you're finding that the family is not the unit that it once was, and that's the foundation for people finding out who they are. So you wonder why the media has such an impression on young kids. Generally, is because in part, 50% of it really is that it's going to have an impact anyway. But the other 50% is that I don't think parents are taking out enough time to teach their kids discrete viewing habits. You have to teach them what is appropriate to watch and what isn't.
Well, I have another general question. I would like each of you to answer this. Back to children again. Teenagers, it seems today, are much more sexually active than they have ever been. Do you think that's in big part because of media or because of peer pressure?
I would say both. I think. I don't know if you can blame. I don't know who the villain is here, but again, it's sad. And again, it's almost like when we talked about violence, the reality and the art. I mean, it may be titillating to watch provocative shows on televisions or at the movies, but there comes a responsibility. I mean, if you commit the sexual act, a woman can get pregnant. And again, in this society, men have sort of shunned that and say, well, that's the woman's problem. You know, traditionally in literature, I mean, the Scarlet Letter, the woman was always portrayed as the person immoral, and the man was, you know, he was just kind of a cool stud who could, you know, be cool and impregnate a woman, and where the woman bore the burden. I think, I don't know if that has changed so much, but what strikes me is that sex has become just totally without emotion or commitment, and it's become a physical act. If you look at movies, music videos, etc., that would be my opinion.
Yeah. I want to add to that slightly in regards to responsibility. Say a person, a male and a female, decided to actually engage in intercourse that might produce a child. You know, I think the responsibility is equal on both parts at the time of conception. I mean, a lot of times men are always getting the finger pointed at them, but a lot of times these women deliberately pick the wrong type of guys to be with. I mean, you can go on any street in Buffalo, whether it's, you know, Fillmore, Box Street, or whatever the case may be, and these women will be attracted to some bald-headed, 40-ounce drinking, walking, bow-legged punk, and they'll say that guy is cute. Now, if you're a nice person, you're polite and a gentleman, you do things like really nice things, like open a car door for them. They'll look at you like you're crazy, and they'll try and take advantage of it. So the women, they do know the difference between right and wrong, and they'll deliberately pick the wrong person because that person is probably more exciting because they have a gold tooth and gold chain, and go to some club someplace, you know, and they'll get with that person, and they know that person is irresponsible. So if they did produce a child or something like that.
There's another point here, though, Chuck. In the era of AIDS, when AIDS is so prevalent, that you know, sex is not just a matter of morality. I mean, you may be playing Russian roulette with your own life.
Well, that's correct. And a lot of times these guys, these women know these guys are so-called players, you know, and a lot of these women, they sort of have like a revolving door between their legs, so to speak, you know. And I think that in that respect, they have to be held responsible themselves too. I mean,
you would never put this on the man, Charles.
Certainly,
you don't think there's men that look for women?
Oh, absolutely. I think it works both ways. But the only problem is the emphasis has always been placed on the men. But it
I think a lot of that has to do with the media making those gangster type men, you know, more acceptable, more.
But why do women find it more acceptable? Why don't they have a brain? No women have a brain.
I have no idea, but I think that a lot has to do with the media. Again, it's okay to be a gangster rapper. It's okay to be cool and to wear your pants down low and to wear the, you know, earrings and the bandanas.
You know what I like? I like us getting back to the subject. And with regards to the media and the media impact with regards to sex. So I think that was very good. And that was
it fit in well.
Yeah, it fit in well. Now we're right back to the topic area as far as the media and what impact it may have and have with regards to the images related to women. I think some of the programming, I believe some of the programming years ago was programming that was geared to bring about a certain moral lesson. Whether that programming,
I think the Cosby Show was a great
Cosby, Leave It to Beaver,
Ozzie and Harriet.
But dating myself, whether we liked it or not,
but they were also two family households,
right? And certain moralistic moral values and lessons. Nowadays, the programming,
I look at Married with
Children, are something other than one with a moralistic values.
When we return, we're going to discuss specific ways that recording artists are affecting the ways in which we think and feel in society.
Okay, sure.
Hello, welcome back again, and I'm Jetaun Legg, and this is Charles Alexis, and again we're talking about the influence that media has on our society. I'm going to ask one more question to our guest panel, and that is, what do you think we can do as a society, as an individual, to change this whole thing around?
I guess I'll start. I think standards do change. There was recently a re-release of a famous movie, Midnight Cowboy, and when it came out, I think in the late 60s or early 70s, it was rated X. Today, it'd probably be PG. So standards do change. But I think what's happened, though, is that we've reached the limit of where we can go. There's so much violence, sex, and brutal language in our society that we can't look to government, we can't look to the law. We have to look to ourselves, to our own families, to ourselves as individuals. With the power ultimately in a democracy rests with the people, and the people, I think, have to change this, and it includes musicians, fans, whatever.
If I could, then to piggyback off of what Tony had just said, I wholeheartedly agree. The answer lies in the citizens, the grassroots, your everyday citizen who can work and impact upon those who own companies, the media, the various products, industries, corporations, our elected officials. The power is in those at home. We can change, and we can make a change.
Absolutely.
But we have to take that moral responsibility.
Absolutely, I agree. It's really a matter of collectively coming together, everyone, elected officials. We really can't depend on the people who control the media to do anything unless everyone takes an active role. Then they'll be forced to do what is responsible morally, and that's something that we have to all get involved with, as both Tony and Robert said. It's really an active role on everyone's part, and also to the parents, monitor what your kids watch a little more often. I don't think it's just the media's responsibility to raise your kids. You don't need to allow your kids to look up to people they don't know as role models. I mean, these kids don't know Charles Barkley or some other athlete who's at a distance from them. I think the role models should be people that they see on a daily basis within the community, people like Judge Russell, people like Tony. I'll be modest and not say myself, but people who are right in the community, and someone who can reach out to them and say, well, these are the right things to ascribe to, these are the wrong things. You need that, right there in front of you.
Okay.
Not at a distance.
Very quickly, if you can give me one sentence. There's media personnel out there, they're watching the show, a rapper, a writer, a movie maker. What would you say to them?
I would say that just consider your art as if it was going to be a song or whatever you're doing, as if it would be heard by your own family and in your own community, and think of the consequences.
And further, that your consequences of your acts, of your conduct, touches and reaches more people than just adults. It's affecting our young people, and in turn, it's affecting our lives, our community lives, and the stability of our community.
Yeah, and I think that whatever we say, they're going to continue doing it their way because they're making money. But I would say that the rapper who's a gangster rapper who may influence some young Joe on the street to commit an act of violence, that act of violence could be done against one of the record company executives, family members. So you have to look at it from that point of view, considering a lot of these people don't have compassion enough to, set the record straight as far as the violence and the sex in the media.
Well, I want to thank all of our guests, and I want to thank you for joining us.
And until next time, take care.